Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Shed Organics Show. Today we are joined by the incredible Nick Holliday from Belvedere Farm. He's in South Burnett region in Queensland, a beautiful part of the world, just inland from the Sunshine Coast. And if you're watching the video, you'll be able to see the beautiful backdrop behind him. But as a regenerative farmer on quite a few acres on the Sunshine Coast, Nick has quite a lot of wonderful information to explain to us why the regenerative approach, or even what a regenerative approach is, why this is good for the soil, why it is able to build soil health over time, have a positive environmental impact, and then for him as a farmer provides so much value in bringing everything that he does full circle to the community that it makes it worthwhile, gives him purpose, and allows him to fulfill a part in the community that he feels really valuable for doing. So this conversation is really important. It highlights our farmers and highlights the way in which we should be doing things, how we can support these guys, and some of the big, deep questions that we need to undertake in order to think about how to make big system changes to our food and to the incentives behind growing food and connecting that food to our communities. So let's do it. Let's jump in. Without further ado, this is Nick Holliday from Belvedere Farms. What does it mean to be a regenerative farmer in your eyes? How would you kind of tackle that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question what regenerative farming means because like everyone brings a different interpretation to that. And like increasingly we're seeing the term sort of greenwashed a bit too, where people who are using practices that like I personally wouldn't be comfortable with are
Mm,
calling themselves regenerative. So like it's a pretty broad church, but like for us it means growing food in an ecosystem for our community in a way that it can continue to thrive for 1,000 years. Basically,
ooh.
that's the way we look at it. It's about the food, it's about country, it's about building community, and it's about building something long lasting.
Yeah, and you're right about the term being used or overutilized a lot at the moment. The reason I say so is because I myself use the term to try and generalize a style of practice of farming, in a certain direction. And it's really interesting to hear from farmers themselves what that actually means to them who are practicing regenerative techniques, because it kind of does vary as to what people throw into that bucket. Um, I wonder if you could talk to maybe then your farm as a place, and maybe a little bit of backstory for those that don't know in terms of, was it ever farmed conventionally? And what was the switch like to regenerative, or has it been regenerative the whole time? And talk me through that.
Yeah, mate. So we farm on about 350 acres of Waka Waka country in the South Burnett, which is sort of about 2 hours west of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. And
Beautiful.
we've been farming for about 10 years now, but have only moved to this particular farm about 18 months ago.
Right.
And the history of this farm is really deeply conventional, basically. So I guess, Waka Waka mob managed it for 40,000 years. And obviously, had a large population here, a stable community of people living from the land, growing food, building their lives here. It was, in terms of sort of its colonial history, this area was settled really early for Queensland, 1850s. And this was initially cattle and sheep property and then a dairy farm for a long time.
Cool.
And then sort of more recently, before we bought it, it's had sort of commercial forestry happening here. So people have logged it a bit.
Hmm.
People have grown hay on our cultivation flats here, which itself is a pretty extractive practice. And then for the 10 years immediately before we bought it, it was essentially a hobby farm. So
Okay.
this has sort of had every type of management over the last sort of couple of 100 years. And when we came to it, it was in a pretty poor state, which I guess is
Hmm.
one of the ways we were able to afford it.
Yeah.
But certainly, like since we came here about 18 months ago, we've been doing a lot of work to build diversity, get more desirable species on the farm, plants and animals, build soil organic matter, and a really big part of that too has been bringing our animals on here and growing food for our community as well.
Cool. Um, there's so much that I want to tap into already. That sounds fascinating. I kind of have this big part of me that seems to want to be a farmer, but probably just don't don't have the capacity. But just the excitement of being able to take over a piece of land and then bring your vision to life, to me, I can really connect with. So when you landed, you spoke about diversity, bringing things in, fixing the soil, all of that kind of thing. Talk to me about the idea of bringing in pasture because pasture raised animals are now starting to be recognized as obviously one of the most nutrient filled ways of raising animals. Um, I myself eat a fair bit of meat and I'm really conscious about where I get it from and trying to make sure that the pasture that they're eating is diverse, it's rich, all of this type of thing. Can you give me your sort of top things on pasture and what you were aiming to build with what you found initially?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, when we came here, the pasture was really dominated by giant rat's tail grass, which I guess, like a lot of Queenslanders will know, is an extremely undesirable introduced species of grass. And one of the real problems with it, other than not being particularly nutrient dense for livestock, is it tends to form a bit of a monoculture in the paddocks.
Mm,
So we had, literally hundreds of acres with very few species other than that giant rat's tail grass. So everything that we're doing in terms of pasture at the moment is really about building diversity.
mm,
So we've introduced sort of holistically planned grazing, which has been a huge thing because the way that those undesirable grasses spread is, like what was happening before we came here. People turn cattle out on a landscape, 350 acres here with 20 cattle wandering around it. And cattle aren't stupid. They go and eat the most delicious thing they can find first.
yeah.
When that's all gone, they move to the second most delicious thing. But then after a week or so, the most delicious thing that they started with is now this tall, and they come back and graze it back again.
Mm,
Over time, that actually eradicates the stuff that cattle like to eat and favors the stuff that they won't touch. So that's sort of how we got here. So
yeah.
what we've been doing is using electric fences to bring cattle into areas at a relatively high density. So small areas, a large amount of cattle, but then moving them very frequently and giving the areas that they come out of a long rest. So
Hmm.
what that does is it means they come in, they graze everything quite severely, including the stuff they don't want to. They shit all over everything, they pee everywhere, they trample it down, and then they move on. And over time, what that does is it gives all species a chance to recover and
Mm.
ultimately doesn't favor those unpalatable species. So just through that, you start to see more diversity in your landscape, more plant species, better nutrition for the cattle, and then better outcomes on the farm, basically.
That's brilliant. Yes, that's a rotational grazing sort of method, isn't it? And really taking advantage of what's the best, most optimal part of the plant as well. Because like when they're coming around and grazing, right, that top section is generally the most nutritious. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's absolutely right. The growing leaf tips are the most nutritious part of the plant, so that's always the place that they'll go first.
Yeah.
And the trick is to put cattle into an area at a density where they graze once, bite those nutritious tips off, but then move on before they go back and start hammering things two, three, four times.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've just, as you described, these plants will struggle to come back from that. And then you're just, yeah, you're favoring all of these tough, hardy ones that aren't the sweet, delicious ones that they seem to like.
Yeah,
Do you
absolutely.
do any kind of like cover cropping style things on the farm? Because I love soil health, trying to build soil. That's a big part of what I'm trying to achieve. And cover cropping is a big part of that for me, even on a small garden scale. So, can you tell me about that on your farm?
Yeah, look, cover cropping is a really interesting one. We resisted doing it for a long time, and before we moved here, we farmed in Mullaney, like closer to the coast, where we got sort of 3 meters of rainfall a year. We could grow grass year round, and we had plenty of diversity in our pastures there, so we didn't feel a huge need to do cover cropping and things like that. But particularly out here, where we've taken on this farm that is in very poor health and has very low diversity, we've really jumped into cover cropping. So I went and bought a an old 70s Conishay Coulter coil tine planter. So that's a big
Cool.
planter that goes behind the tractor, and it's awesome in its design. There's a straight disc at the front that cuts a groove through the roots of the grass. And then there's a tine, like a little finger that comes along behind it and plants the seed in behind that cut. And there's no tillage, very minimal soil disturbance, and you can
Beautiful.
plant straight into pasture. So we've got about 80 acres in cover crop at the moment. We
Cool.
use a diverse mix from Kandanga Farm Store. So that's got, geez, so the summer mix we've just planted's got sorghum, sun hemp, sunflowers, lab cowpeas, clovers, millet, all sorts of stuff. And
Brilliant.
yeah, look, it's incredible for us, and particularly we don't just graze cattle. A big part of what we do is we raise pasture raised pigs and pasture raised laying hens, and particularly the pigs can be quite hard on a landscape.
Mm,
So where we do have bare patches that have been left, sort of where there was a shelter that has moved on or something like that, the cover crop is just incredible for that really quick repair there.
mm.
And what we've seen, uh, we've been telling people that the giant rat's tail and the poor condition of this farm didn't happen in a year. It happened over 50 years or 100 years, and it might take 500 years to bring this farm back to health. But in terms of, for myself, really satisfying quick change, planting cover crops has just been incredible because, within 60 or 80 days, we grow great food for cattle. We move that pasture diversity really quickly in areas we can. And we're really excited to see how that develops over the next few years, basically.
That's brilliant, mate. That sounds exactly right. That's the type of thing that I try and explain to people is there's just something magical about all this diversity in these cover crops. It seems to just supercharge the soil regeneration quite quickly through all of the exudates, the life that it brings in, the microbes, all of these types of things. So brilliant. That's very, very cool. One thing you did mention about the rest of the animals that you raise, I want to try and move towards talking about the actual process of raising ethical meat, right? Uh, there's so many people in the world that believe, because of what we see in factory farms and things like this, they believe that any kind of treatment of an animal in terms of butchering it, bringing it to table is a bad thing. And while like half of me agrees with that, half of me knows that, and again, I eat a lot of meat, that that's the most nutrient dense, bioavailable form of nutrition that humans are sort of evolved to eat. Now, I know that's a big sort of premise for this question, mate, but where do you sit on ethical meat production in terms of just how you do it, how you treat the animals, and how you justify that to yourself?
Well, hey, it's a huge question, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
and so something that you hear from a lot of livestock farmers is sort of this antagonism towards vegans. But look, we are an absolutely pro-vegan livestock farm here because even the vegans who get on our Facebook and tell me I suck, they have done something that the vast majority of the population hasn't done, which is deeply consider the ethics of what they're eating.
Hmm.
Um, so, like, I will take someone who thinks that we're animal murderers 1,000 times of someone who pulls into a KFC drive-through without thinking about it. So, like, that's sort of our fundamental political premise of it. But like in terms of the ethics of meat eating, it's pretty hard to justify eating factory farm meat on an ethical
Hmm.
basis, I reckon.
Hmm.
But in terms of meat eating in general, humans have been eating meat for tens of thousands of years. we are adapted to do that. And, also like in terms of, this feeding the world, these ethical considerations you've got to weigh up. A lot of the world is only suited to grazing livestock, right?
Mhm.
Like a lot of farmland. If we are all going to live on farmed monocultures like soy, nuts, almonds, whatever, we are going to run out of arable land very quickly. Whereas rangelands, whether it's in America or Australia or Africa, wherever you go, rangelands where we can sensitively and appropriately graze grasses to produce meat for people to eat, like
Mhm.
that is a really key component in feeding the world. So that's
Yeah.
that's sort of my ethical framework around why I reckon it's okay to eat meat. But then, as a meat eater, you've got a duty to make sure that you're not effing the planet up too badly and you're not effing yourself up. And that's hard. That's hard because it's it's still easier to buy heroin than it is to buy my meat, right? So like the small scale farming, the regenerative agriculture movement has got like a long way to go in terms of meeting the needs of the population. And
Yeah.
that's the gap we've got to close, I reckon.
Yes. That's a brilliant answer, mate. The consideration about feeding the world, I just wanted to ask for some clarification on what you meant on one thing. That you spoke about certain amounts of land on the planet not being suitable for growing things other than sort of roaming cattle and things like this. Um, are you talking about if it was conventionally monoculture farmed for vegetables and for, nuts and soy and all of this? Or are we thinking like, what if it was almost like permaculture style? So it's like food foresty, we've got all of that. What style? I'm just trying to like, build that
Yeah.
argument. What sort of style of gardening are we talking about in that respect? And could we essentially feed them with a lot of vegetables as well?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I would love to see that happen. But like that is such a big question because our entire agricultural system, our entire food system, and to a certain extent our economic system is based around people eating commodity crops like corn
Mm,
and soy and stuff like that. So, in order to do that, there is a huge unpicking to be done.
mm, mm.
And I mean,
That's an
it's also
understatement.
yeah, and look, I wish I had more answers. I mean, I am a livestock farmer. Have done some permaculture training and obviously have variously practiced it over the years. But the the question for me with permaculture is always that you can live in a permaculture community and feed 100 people, on small acreage or whatever, and that's sick. And if people are able to do that, they ought to. Um, the question of how that scales
Mm,
is unanswered for me, and like it's untested as well because like if permaculture had the resources and the government support that growing monoculture GMO soybeans had, we
yeah.
could have a real crack at feeding the world with it. But until we unpick all of those systems, it's kind of difficult, I guess.
Yeah, that's the nail on the head, mate. The systems that we have in place are absolutely set up for failure in that regard. Extractive and I guess the definition of unsustainable in that regard as well. So sorry for the deep questions, but I
Oh,
absolutely
that's
love
great.
that kind of just just having different perspectives is really, really important. Um, can we come back to the processing of your meat and stuff like this and getting it where I want to take this is getting it to people. As you said, it's easier to buy heroin than it is to buy your meat. Um, I love that you guys are, direct to the community. You want to feed as many people locally as possible. I tend to believe along the lines of our previous discussion that that is one of the secrets to feeding the world is feeding locally in small sort of local sections. Talk to me about bringing your meat to the community, how it's done, and the processes that you take to make sure that it's as good as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So look, we raise the animals here ourselves. We don't outsource anything to anyone. At the point where our livestock enter the food chain, I personally load them into a truck and take them to a local abattoir.
Awesome.
They go in on a Sunday night and are killed first thing Monday morning. From there, they go to another farmer who has an on-farm butchery, who cuts and packages the meat for us. We collect it from them and distribute it directly to
Beautiful.
our community-supported agriculture collective that's got about 80 members. We supply a few restaurants and cafes, a couple of resellers, and variously do farmers markets and stuff like that. So it's a it is a really small loop, I guess.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we would love to be able to do the slaughter ourselves, have an on farm facility, and we'd love to be able to butcher it ourselves as well. But this is, again, one of these food system problems. A farmer can't do everything. And, there is some role for specialization. So we want to be really good farmers and work with really good abattoirs and really good butchers, basically.
Yeah, I can see the sense in that definitely because you just like you expected to do everything. Um, and it's expensive to then hire other people and not many people skilled or able to do it and all of these types of things. As a business owner then, going regenerative in the face of, again, there's that term, um, in the face of statistics I'm hearing that say that chemical agriculture, traditional agriculture, the way we've been doing it seems to be 20%, 30% more yield. And I tend to disagree personally that that's, eventually I think, the long-term benefits of this regenerative organic approach will far outweigh the current agriculture. But what's that like for you? I know that's
Yeah.
kind of, again, not really a good question, but what's
That's a
that
great.
like?
That's a great question. So look, I would farming conventionally here would be cool as hell, right? So like we could have 350 acres here, a little herd of stud cattle that we shoot up with all sorts of chemicals to keep them fat and healthy. Um, that would we could not move them every day. We could just turn them out on the 350 acres and see how we go. And like
Wow.
our neighbours are doing this, right? Um, and there's a few things about that. The first is be a lot less work for us. I could just like ride around on a horse all day, like an episode of Yellowstone, and like looking at my cattle. But so like as nice as that sounds, we can't make a living doing that here because all of those folks with a 350 acre property, a 500-acre property around here are actually getting in the car every day and driving to town to go and work,
No way.
at the power plant, at the tractor dealership, at the IGA or whatever. The only way for us to make a full time, for my wife and I to make a full time living farming is by having a really low input system. So we're not spending a heap of money on fertilizer and chemicals and stuff like that. It's by having a diverse mixed species farm. So not just sending cattle to the sale yards
Mhm.
once a year, but marketing our own beef, marketing our own pork, marketing our own eggs. Um, and by doing it all ourselves. So
Yeah.
by not just sending animals off to a sale yard, but by actually taking that all the way through to the consumer paying us the full price for the produce. Like that's the only way we can make a full-time living here. So even if my heart wasn't in regenerative agriculture, which like it 1,000 times is obviously,
Yeah.
um, this would be an economic decision for our family because
Cool.
just running things conventionally on a 350-acre farm out here, you can't make a full-time living doing it.
Goodness me, that's puts real evidence to that fact that I was saying before about 30%. It doesn't seem to, maybe the yield is there, maybe, but it
Oh,
doesn't translate to
yeah,
actual real money, right?
the yield is definitely there in chemical agriculture, and this is whether you're running beef cattle or whether you're growing canola or
Yeah.
cotton or the yield is there in full chemical conventional agriculture. But the problem is the margins are so small. You need 1,000 head of cattle to make
Mm.
something out of it, not 50 head of cattle like we have now.
Yeah, true. I have actually heard something similar to that as well. That makes a lot of sense. So, hey guys, really quickly, jumping in, I just want to remind you, if you are not subscribed to this show, that is the number one thing that you can do to show me your support. So if you're finding value from this conversation and you're deeply engaged, I would love you to hit the follow or subscribe button. All right, back to the show. This it makes me really want to help other people more to support people like yourself because there's so much that goes into it, so much thought. You're actually stewards of the land and then serving the community in such an important way. What's the community impact like for you, mate? How does that feel, being able to do something so good?
It feels incredible. It feels incredible. I was texting another farmer earlier today because we were both not living the dream of farm life. I was driving to Brisbane to pick up 4 pallets of egg cartons, and he was digging a bogged ute out of a mud pit trying to collect eggs. And we literally said, even though today's a bit shit, this is still the best job we've ever had.
That's
Um,
awesome.
like it's incredible. And look, I talk to a lot of conventional farmers, and the thing that I really notice about it is you're on your own a lot. I don't think I could labour all day driving a tractor with a planter on it or harvesting wheat or whatever. And then at the end of the day, all that I produce just disappears in a truck and goes somewhere, and like Christ knows what happens to it.
Mm,
The fact that I get to see a calf born, move pigs every week, go and like interact with the chickens when we collect eggs every day, but then take that all the way through to handing a carton of eggs to someone, whose little toddler wants to carry them to the car, and who I know are going to eat those tomorrow morning. That is the most incredible satisfaction in terms of food production. And then, like, I guess, like the agroecology side of it. Getting to watch a landscape change because of the care and effort and intellect that you've put into it is just like a remarkable thing. So I feel very lucky to be part of the food chain in that really direct way.
yeah, that's such a really good way of encapsulating kind of what I would feel about my own garden in terms of just
Yep.
like spending time in it, seeing how it grows, seeing how it provides for people, having that kind of connection between cooking, eating, growing. Um, and for you, that's on such a big scale, but you're then taking it to the community and impacting so many lives. I loved that little image of the young one taking the eggs back to eat tomorrow morning. That's like that makes your heart sing in moments like that.
Yep.
And you're absolutely right with the fact that when you're not when you're so disconnected from that end result, it's the same thing that we see with kids that don't understand the food that they're getting in the supermarket. They don't know where it's come from. They go, oh, it comes from Woolies or it comes from Coles, whatever. Um, and it's that disconnect. So you're the farmer explaining how it's been done, handing it to the kids, the consumer, and having that direct connection from paddock to plate in so many ways. Um, Sorry, I just got a phone call. I'll have to cut that out. Um, I had that off. Anyway, sorry. I will cut that out. Yeah, that's basically stumped my train of thought. But I love what that has done for you, for farmers like yourself. And I think that is kind of the secret to bringing back that joy of farming and the connection to land and making it purposeful for people. Um, Mate, let's go again towards your butchering process. The I know you said you personally take it to the abattoirs. What is that for you? Why do you do that? Why do you think that matters to the animal in terms of minimizing stress, all of these things?
Yeah, look, our abattoir does a fantastic job, but everyone has seen sort of the expose videos of like secretly recorded stuff in abattoirs, and it would be a shame to me for us to treat these animals so well for their entire lives, and then not be as much of a part of that process as possible, basically. So
Mm.
it's part of our commitment to the animals, that we do as much of that and take as much responsibility as possible for it. And like honestly, like it's a somber moment too, right? I mean, I think a lot of people have a picture of a farmer as just like, animals are just units of production. We buy them, we sell them, we kill them, we send them off, whatever. When I walk pigs off the truck down the ramp at the abattoir, driving away is always a somber moment because I know they are going to be killed to enter the food chain, and I do deeply care about them. But I at least know that they have had the absolute best care throughout their lives, and the meat that they produce will nourish, not some big chain, right? Not, what they won't contribute to the bottom line of Coles' profits at the end of the year. They will contribute to people we actually know eating pork chops,
Mm.
and the money that those folks pay us goes back into our family being able to pay the bills and keep doing what we're doing. So, it's that connection. It's like a few things we've talked about today. It's knowing that you're not just a cog in a machine. Everything you do has meaning and purpose and is part of something bigger.
Mm. Brilliant, brilliant. That really makes a lot of sense. Your method of farming as well, like the way that you're uh some would say adding to the land. I want to kind of bring it towards some sort of debate in climate change where they're talking about methane gas emissions from cows, which I find a little bit laughable as one of the main contributors, carbon dioxide. Of course, carbon dioxide is really important to our environment, to everything in life. Um, the regenerative approach, the way that you're farming with livestock, as you said, you spoke a little bit about earlier, having the ground rest, this diversity is able to come back. These plants and these things are then sequestering that carbon
Yep.
and doing more. It's like a carbon negative approach. Can you talk to that for me at all and any knowledge you have on that?
Yeah, look, absolutely, mate. And again, like we could talk for an hour about this, right?
Yeah.
But sort of my fundamentals of my thinking about this are, you know, climate change, in my opinion, is real, and we ought to be concerned about it. In terms of methane for cattle, that's a really complex one. And the first thing I would say about methane is we can have a chat about the methane emissions of cattle when they start regulating coal and gas mining and
Oh,
electricity generation, because the problem with coal and gas is this big, and the
yeah.
problem with cattle is this big. So maybe we could go to the heart of the issues first. But you're right. The way that we graze by building soil organic matter, and that's like expressed as a percentage, we are still to get tests back here. But if I had to guess, I would say the worn out old hayfield that I'm looking at now would be somewhere around 1% organic matter. I am pretty confident that over a few years, we will build that up to 2, 3, 4% organic matter. And what that percentage is carbon being stored in your soil.
Mhm.
So that is us pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it somewhere where it can do some good. So yeah, like climate change is important. We've all got to talk about these things, but people get diverted into non-issues. Like the methane caused by my cattle burping can be captured by the way I work with the land, and fundamentally, at least it feeds people. Whereas the machine that we're feeding in terms of climate is way bigger than cattle burps, I guess,
Yeah.
would is the way I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely right. As you said, it's a bit of a can of worms, another hour's conversation. But the what I wanted to capture is that essence of the fact that your soil building, the organic matter that you're then building and storing more carbon over time is the important part about that. The factory farming methods where you've got 1,000 head of cattle in a small area with very minimal pasture and like there's no capture going on there, that's when people use that as an example, and we're
Absolutely.
throwing the baby out with the bathwater in that
Yeah,
regard.
totally. Totally.
Yeah. So, I've also seen, I'm sure you're aware of white oak pastures
Yeah.
in the US, and people like Joel Salatin. I've seen evidence of them using these chicken trawlers that come behind the cattle and kind of scratch in the droppings and all of this. Um, what's your method of chickens and how do you raise your chickens and how do they contribute to your system as well?
Yeah. So we've got about 1,500 laying hens here, which in terms of scale is tiny, right? Like
Yeah.
the average factory farm would have 80 to 100,000 chickens on a particular property. But our chickens are out on pasture 24/7. We've got purpose-built mobile sheds, either on skids or on wheels, that we drag along to fresh pasture every few days. Um, they're encircled by electric net, which keeps the chickens in, but also keeps foxes and dingoes out. And yeah, so they proceed across our country all the time, typically following the cattle herd. Although one of the sort of mechanics of it is the cattle actually move too quickly for the chickens to
Right.
always be right behind them. But the chickens do the most incredible thing because they're a high impact animal. They peck and scratch, so they create a lot of micro disturbance on the soil surface. They eat a great deal of bugs and worms and ticks and things like that. And that is part of the ecosystem where we've been able to eliminate chemicals to control parasites on the cattle because they're out there eating flies, they're scratching through cow manure so that fly larvae can't hatch, they're eating ticks, things like that. Um, and like super importantly as well, chickens, their manure is incredibly high in nitrogen, and other trace elements, phosphorus, stuff like that. So you can see along the country where we've been dragging chicken trailers, there are green stripes behind them, such is the nutrient concentration, particularly where they
Wow.
roost at night. And that's like an interesting counterpoint with factory farming because when you apply for certification to sell eggs in Queensland, they treat everyone the same and they treat us all like factory farms. So one of the questions is, how will you deal with manure waste from your chickens? Because when you concentrate it and it's in the on the floor of a shed or in a slurry tank, it's toxic waste,
Hmm.
and it's a problem for factory chicken producers. And we had to have the conversation that says we have no manure waste to deal with. It is out in the ecosystem where it should be. And it's actually an incredible net benefit for us, the fertility that the chickens bring.
Yeah. It's using them super effectively because not only like, you want them for the eggs, sometimes for the meat, depending on whether that's what you do or not. But their input to country, again, as you said, just has this symbiotic seemingly relationship that goes alongside the cattle and, maintaining the pests and things that you said. So you're then again limiting expenditure on chemicals and stuff. I'm struggling to see any downsides to the way you're farming. Is there anything that you find really difficult about the way that you do, apart from obviously the fact that there are some really difficult jobs sometimes, but
Yeah.
is there
Well,
any hard stuff?
yeah, look, there's an awful lot of
Sorry, I shouldn't. You're right. That sounded like way too simple. You know
no,
what I mean by
no,
that?
it's good.
Complicated in terms of negatives towards this way of farming.
Yeah, there is a lot of hard stuff and there are a lot of negatives. And I think you mentioned Joel Salatin before. I've been public in criticizing Joel Salatin because like as an inspiration to me, incredibly beneficial to a lot of people. But one of the things that I find is that Joel Salatin and a lot of others in that sphere make all this sound easy. They say
Mm.
you can quit your white collar job and go and start a farm. And that is incredibly difficult. And that's what I would say is the hardest part of all of this. And all the little hard parts flow from it, which is uh, in this current system, it's not particularly economically viable.
Mm.
So, my wife and I work 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, we pay the mortgage and have a good standard of living. And our motivation in this is not to have a heap of Maseratis and like go on 3 overseas holidays a year, but it is not a financially successful business that you can shout from the rooftops. And that makes a few other things harder. That means we can't hire a heap of staff to spread the load of some of these difficult jobs. It means that we spend a lot of time doing stuff that's not farming in the traditional sense, like delivering, for
Mm.
instance. We do a 14-hour delivery day every single week off the farm.
Okay.
So it's the economic context is the hardest bit,
Mm.
and the fact that sometimes I'm out at night fixing a tractor or whatever just flows from that really. So that's the downside, and that's the advice I'd give to anyone who's sort of inspired by hearing these stories. Is when you're looking at someone who says, "Hey, you can have a really successful farm." I'll pick on Joel Salatin because he's big enough to do this, but you look at him and you say, "Well, he inherited a farm. He didn't. He's not paying a mortgage. he also, and thankfully, and this is great and right, and I hope to do this for our son, but he inherited a heap of skills and knowledge about managing that particular piece of country. I am a fourth generation farmer. Not a single previous generation of my family has handed a family farm on to the next generation.
Wow.
We've all started from scratch every time. And there's a knowledge drain that's associated with that someone in Joel Salatin's position doesn't have. So, you know, everyone should give this a crack, but people really have to understand that it's sometimes not as good as it looks on Instagram,
Yeah.
basically. And
You
that's the same of running a really productive food garden in your backyard, right? Like,
true.
yeah, it's like it's easy to sort of show the bowl of produce, very difficult to show you out at midnight chasing possums off your tomatoes or whatever. Right.
I don't know how you managed to nail the possums and the tomatoes with me, but that's exactly me. Um, that's so important to consider because you're right. I hadn't even thought about it like that when you say that they're painting this pretty picture of what farming is like. Because, yeah, in some regards, I've probably argued that, we should all just switch to regenerative farming, but the incentive needs to be there from the system for you to do so in terms of
Absolutely.
financial support and say, hey, like, look, we'll back you to do this because it's important for us, important for our people. And I really apologize if I came across saying that it wasn't hard, but
No, not at all.
there are so many this is what I wanted to highlight is there are so many difficult things for you guys to do as farmers. And as you say, and as we mentioned earlier, having to do everything yourself means that fixing that tractor is not able to be outsourced. You're not then able to relax, to regenerate, spend time with your family, enjoy the community a little bit better, blah blah blah, etc. etc., which then would give you a better quality of life. You've already said that you've got, when you're having a terrible day, you still think that this is the best job you've ever had. So that's
It is.
beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's such a difficult thing, and to really undertake it, you've got to really go all in. Um, what can you see in terms of like some of the things that could be done on that financial level to support people like yourself making the switch to regenerative if they've, farmed that way their whole life? What
Yep.
can be done to really help and support people that's probably not being done, to be honest?
Yeah. Well, again, like it's a big and complex question because like ultimately, under capitalism, the market will sort this out, which is eventually we will run to the end of our ability to use chemicals. We will run to the end of our ability to abuse soil and animals and stuff like that. And that'll sort all this out quick smart. But the trick will be to turn the ship around before something apocalyptic like that.
Yeah.
And like the challenge, like I always explain it, the challenge is that people like yourself who want to eat really good, ethically grown, regenerative food, they pay the full cost of the food, say a dozen eggs, right? And so our eggs retail for sort of $12, $13 a dozen. And the person who makes the scrambled eggs on Sunday morning pays the full cost of that. You can go and buy $5 eggs at Woolworths, but someone pays the missing $7. So it's either the environment pays as it gets polluted with chicken shit, the neighbours of factory chicken farms pay because of the smell and the noise, the workers in factory chicken farms pay because they work, for low wages in appalling conditions. Um, the animals pay. The animals pay for in the terrible conditions that they're kept in. Everyone pays except the end consumer. But it's not good enough for us to say, well, everyone should just spend more money on food because that can't happen either. And what policy settings actually allow that to be fixed is difficult. But I was talking to a farmer from the UK a little while ago, and this is a program that's been running in the UK for a long time, where they actually pay farmers per hectare for specific regenerative practices.
Cool.
So if you're a conventional wheat farmer, and rather than just grow a second crop of wheat in a particular year, you commit to leaving a paddock in cover crop for 6 months before ploughing it in and planting wheat again, you get 120 pounds a hectare or whatever. And there's a huge list of these things for planting shelter belts, for implementing regenerative grazing, stuff like that. that is an example where farmers like us can actually extract some value from the system for doing the right thing. Because what you see so often is just farmers getting punished for doing the wrong thing. And that's actually very difficult. So I think I'd like to see more incentives out there for doing the right thing that don't just rely on the end consumer paying more because everyone's having trouble making ends meet, and that's not a good enough solution, basically.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's my first kind of thing to go to is just having a little bit of incentive support financially. You mentioned these farmers going out and working a completely other job during the week. They're doing full-time work outside of this, trying to support the whole thing. There's no incentive for them to switch out. Like if it's going to be probably a few years, I would say, before you're getting somewhat of getting to a point where the farm is productive in a regenerative fashion, right? Is
Yeah,
there a bit of a
absolutely.
lag in that regard?
Yeah, look, there's definitely a lag, particularly when you're talking about crop farmers. When our cotton farmers or whatever switch to organic, the transition period is incredibly difficult for them. So yeah, and it's risk too, I mean, businesses that are successful and are good at doing a thing don't just change for no reason because like they think it'd be nice. We've got to give people a really compelling reason to take this stuff up.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, that rounds out that for me. I really want to tap into what's kind of at the top of your interest and the top of your mind at the moment. Something positive, exciting, something that's bringing you, that you're going home thinking about, or just whilst you're on the farm doing your jobs. What's occupying your mind in that space?
Yeah. So look, we've been on this farm for 18 months and we're still very much in a setup phase. So I am still discovering new things as I walk around the property, just like particular way that water sits in the landscape, where particular grasses grow or particular trees. So that's incredibly exciting for me at the moment. And we're doing things at the moment to sort of build on what we've learned for the last 10 years. For instance, we're just about to build a whole heap of new infrastructure for our pasture raised pigs. So we're gonna move them. They're currently on old cultivation country, and we're going to move them up into the forest, which is like a much better place for them. And yeah, we're just like in that really exciting sort of growth phase where I feel like we're learning a lot, and it's excellent, mate. It's a wild ride.
And what a fabulous conversation. What an awesome guy Nick is. So friendly and happy and just willing to share his experience, his expertise, and what it takes to become this integral part of the community that feeds us such good quality produce. And I want to highlight the good quality because, I'm about to put in an order with Nick. I really want to taste what this regenerative approach does to the meat. I'm very cautious about where I select a lot of my products that I buy to put in my body, as I'm sure we all should be. But being able to taste the difference when something is done properly that has this care and love and attention for the animals, for the land, the diversity is there, the fertility is there, and ultimately the nutrition is there as well. So please go and support Nick and his family. The links will be in the description. You can go and find the website. Actually, sorry, he hasn't got a website. You can go find all of their pages where you'll be able to buy meat through them and find where you can become a member for some meat. So I highly suggest you do that. I really want you to go and support them in any way you can. If you enjoyed the conversation, though, share it around, tell your friends, bring people to this conversation and to the podcast. Leave a thoughtful review if you can do some stars or any kind of thoughtful comments. That, of course, helps the show so much, as I always harp on about here at the end. But thank you so much. I really appreciate your support and ongoing viewership and listening to the podcast. So let's see you again next week. Take care and bye for now.